Amahle stood frozen at the edge of her family home, the night air biting through the thin fabric of her dress. Her brother Tendai's angry words still echoed in her ears, sharp and cruel, each one cutting deeper than the last. The argument over the inheritance had escalated faster than she could control, and now she found herself shoved out into the dark, the wooden door slamming behind her with a finality that made her chest ache. She felt the sting of humiliation as she realized she had nowhere to go, no familiar warmth to shield her from the chill. She sank to the dusty porch, wrapping a thin, worn blanket around her shoulders. The night felt impossibly vast and indifferent, and the quiet whispers of neighbors drifting from nearby houses only made her feel smaller. Faces she had grown up around now seemed distant and judging, and her pride, once steady and quiet, lay shattered like broken pottery at her feet. She hugged her knees tightly, trying to make herself as small as possible, wishing the earth would swallow her for just a moment. But amid the shame and the cold, a small spark of determination glimmered. Amahle told herself she would survive this night. She had no plan, no clear path forward, but she would not let this darkness define her. The stars above were cold, but they were there, and if she could endure until morning, she could begin again. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet strength stirred, and she promised herself that whatever came next, she would face it head-on. Amahle shivered under the thin blanket, staring up at the dark sky. The cool night wind made her hug herself tighter, but her thoughts were hotter than the day's argument. Images of what had just happened flashed through her mind, twisting her stomach with anger and sadness. She remembered how Tendai had spoken so carefully to their parents, turning their words and making her look ungrateful, selfish, even cruel. He had whispered little lies, careful enough to make them believe he was the loyal one, and she the troublemaker. Her chest tightened as memories of her childhood came rushing back. She remembered her mother teaching her to be patient, to listen before speaking, to help without expecting anything in return. She remembered her father showing her how to stand tall, even when things felt unfair. Those lessons had always felt simple then, almost easy. But now, in the cold night with nothing but dust under her and betrayal in her heart, she understood their weight. Kindness wasn't weakness. Humility didn't mean letting people walk over. And resilience meant surviving moments like this and still holding on to who you were inside. She thought of Tendai and the smug look he had when the door shut behind her. The bitterness threatened to rise, but she shook her head. Anger would not warm her. Revenge would not change the cold porch or the quiet whispers of neighbors. But remembering her parents' words, she felt a tiny ember of calm determination. She could not control his lies or their reactions, but she could control herself. She could survive, she could rise, and she could prove, not with shouts or arguments, but with her actions, that she was stronger than anyone imagined. Amahle pulled the blanket tighter, letting the night wrap around her, listening to the faint sounds of the village settling down. She thought about the future, the kind she would choose, the kind where she did not bow to cruelty or deceit. She promised herself that this humiliation would not define her. Tendai's tricks and their parents' confusion were only part of the story, not the ending. And in the silence of that dark, dusty porch, a quiet but fierce determination grew inside her. She would rise step by step, and she would do it on her own terms, carrying the lessons of humility, resilience, and kindness like armor against the world. Amahle had just dozed off on the dusty porch when a soft, steady voice pulled her from the edge of sleep. "Child, why do you suffer out here in the night?" she asked. Amahle blinked, startled to see an older woman standing in the moonlight. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes held a sharp kindness that made Amahle instinctively sit up straighter. I have nowhere to go," Amahle whispered, her voice rough from crying and the cold. The woman introduced herself as Nia, a respected elder in the village, known for her wisdom and quiet ways of helping those in need. She settled down beside Amahle, ignoring the dust and chill, and spoke in a gentle but firm tone. "Life can be cruel, child, but it is not without its lessons. Those who persevere with good hearts, who act with honesty and courage, often find doors opening where they least expect." Amahle listened, the words washing over her like a small wave of warmth. She wanted to believe them, even when her mind was heavy with betrayal and fear. Nia's eyes twinkled in the moonlight as she continued. "Opportunities do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they come disguised, hidden behind challenges and unexpected paths. A chance encounter, a wise word, or a small act of courage can change the course of your life. I have seen it many times." Amahle's heart skipped a little. Could change really reach her, sitting alone on a cold porch after being thrown out of her own home? Then Nia leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "There is someone, a man called King Oba. He rules far from here, in the capital, Ndola. He is known not just for his wisdom, but for recognizing courage and integrity in those who have none to spare. I cannot promise what will happen, but if you walk with honesty and strength, paths may appear that you cannot yet see. Amahl's mind raced, the spark Nia planted flickering to life. Could she really make it that far? Could a king truly see her worth when her own family could not? Nia stood, placing a firm hand on Amahl's shoulder. Rest now, child. But remember, your heart and actions are your greatest allies. Keep them pure, keep them strong, and even the darkest nights can lead to brighter days. With that, she vanished into the shadows, leaving Amahle staring at the stars, the cold wind brushing her face. For the first time since being expelled, she felt a hint of hope, fragile but real. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a journey awaited, one that could change everything. And in her chest, a quiet determination began to grow. She would follow that path wherever it led. Amahle woke just as the first pink light of dawn brushed the village. The night had been long and cold, but Nia's words still lingered in her mind, giving her a strange mix of courage and nervous excitement. She folded her thin blanket, tucked it under her arm, and stepped onto the dusty path, leaving behind the porch where shame had clung to her like a second skin. Her feet were bare, the earth rough and uneven beneath her, but each step felt like a quiet act of defiance. The path toward Ndola was not easy. Thorny bushes scratched her legs and loose stones cut into her soles, but she refused to stop. She remembered Nia's advice. Courage and integrity would open doors. Even when a few villagers stared at her with surprise or snickered at her bare feet, Amahle held her head high. Their whispers were like wind against a strong tree. They bent her a little, but they would not break her. She learned to watch the sky for signs of rain, to find streams for water, and to read the land for safer paths. Every obstacle made her more alert, more patient, and more determined. Along the way, Amahle encountered challenges that tested her beyond the physical. A man tried to cheat her when she offered to trade some food she had packed, but she used her quick thinking to turn the situation around without anger, gaining respect instead of trouble. At one point, a small child had lost her way near the river, and Amahle stopped to guide her safely back to the village, even though it slowed her journey. These moments, small yet significant, reminded Amahle that strength was more than survival. It was kindness, intelligence, and courage working together. As the days passed, she grew stronger, her bare feet toughened, and her mind sharper. Each dawn brought new challenges, sudden rainstorms, winding paths that seemed endless, and wild animals lurking in the bush. Yet with every step, her confidence grew. She learned to trust herself, to make decisions quickly, and to face fear without hesitation. The journey was teaching her patience, endurance, and above all, faith in her own abilities. By the time the towering walls of Ndola appeared in the distance, Amahle felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The road had been cruel, but it had also shaped her into someone who could face the unknown with courage. She adjusted her thin blanket around her shoulders, looked toward the city, and took a deep breath. Every step she had walked, every insult she had ignored, every act of courage and kindness along the way, had prepared her for what lay ahead. The encounter with King Oba was no longer just a distant idea whispered by an elder. It was real, and Amahle was ready to meet it, standing taller than she had ever imagined. Amahl's journey to Ndola grew harder with each passing day. One morning, she came across a river swollen with rain. The water rushed violently, and the mud along the banks was slick and dangerous. Many would have turned back, but Amahle knew she had to keep moving. She tested each step carefully, feeling the current tug at her feet, and managed to cross safely. On the other side, a small boy was struggling, trying to rescue his overturned basket of fish. Without a second thought, Amahle waded back into the cold water, helping him gather his catch. The boy thanked her with a shy smile and ran home. It was a small act, unnoticed by the larger world, but it reminded Amahle that even in hardship, kindness could matter. Days later, she faced a group of thieves blocking a narrow path. They demanded the little food she had left, sneering and brandishing sticks. Amahl's heart pounded, but she refused to give in to fear. Thinking quickly, she offered them a bundle of cloth she had packed, telling them she had no food left but promising to pray for their family. The thieves, confused and unsure how to respond to her calmness and courage, let her pass. That night, she slept under the open sky, shivering but unbroken, realizing that strength was not only about defending oneself, but also about keeping one's heart open. Harsh weather tested her in other ways. Rain soaked her clothes and froze her bones. Strong winds pushed her off the paths, and the scorching sun left her skin raw. Yet, even when exhausted and hungry, she stopped to help travelers in need. An old woman struggling with a heavy load, a lost goat needing guidance back to its pen. Amahle never ignored them. She shared what little food she had, gave advice, and offered comfort. Each act cost her time, energy, and sometimes safety, but she believed that living with integrity was more important than speed or ease. By the time she neared Ndola, Amahle felt different from the girl who had left her village. Her feet were blistered, her hands raw, and her clothes torn, but her spirit had grown stronger, steadier. She realized that every trial, every choice to act with compassion instead of anger or fear, had prepared her for the greater challenges ahead. Little did Amahle know these very acts, crossing the river to help a boy, facing thieves without violence, assisting strangers along the road, were quietly following her, creating a reputation that would reach far beyond the paths she walked. When the time came to meet King Oba, it would not just be her courage he would see, but the quiet strength of her character, proven in countless small, unnoticed ways along the journey. And in that truth, Amahle found hope and purpose that no storm or thief could ever take away. Amahle stepped through the grand gates of King Oba's palace, her bare feet sore and her clothes tattered from the long journey. The sun reflected off the tall white walls, and the courtyard buzzed with servants, guards, and visitors, all moving with purpose and authority. Despite her exhaustion, Amahle held her head high. Every step she had taken to reach this moment, the river crossings, the thieves, the harsh weather, felt like a quiet strength coursing through her body. She reminded herself that dignity was something no one could take away, not even the court that might dismiss her at first glance. Inside the throne room, nobles whispered and cast sideways glances. Their eyes lingered on her simple dress and dusty skin, judging her as an ordinary traveler, unworthy of attention. Amahle felt the weight of their skepticism, but did not falter. She focused instead on the calm energy she carried, the same steady confidence that had kept her moving all this way. When she reached the steps before King Oba, she knelt briefly out of respect, and then straightened, meeting his eyes with quiet honesty. The king, wise and observant, studied her closely. He could see the exhaustion, yes, but more importantly, he saw the courage and integrity in her posture, in the way she held herself. Amahle spoke clearly, her voice steady, recounting the betrayal she had suffered at the hands of her brother, Tendai, and the misunderstanding that had driven her from home. She told the story without raising her voice, without anger, without exaggeration, letting the truth of her experience carry the weight. She explained the hardships of her journey, the strangers she had helped, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned along the way. As she spoke, the whispers of the court quieted. There was something in Amahle that could not be ignored, a blend of resilience, honesty, and quiet dignity that spoke louder than wealth or titles. Her eyes, though tired, shone with a resolve that made it impossible to doubt her character. King Oba leaned forward, listening intently, nodding at moments when her words revealed strength tempered by humility. He did not need stories of revenge or displays of anger. He needed truth, and Amahle gave it freely. By the time she finished, the room was silent except for the soft sound of her breathing. Nobles who had sneered now looked uncomfortable, sensing the gravity of her presence. Amahle's heart beat fast, but she remained composed, understanding that this moment was not about proving herself to them. It was about being honest, being herself, and letting her integrity speak. In that quiet, tense room, it became clear that Amahle was more than the hardships she had endured. She was a young woman of courage and principle, standing tall before the king, ready to face whatever judgment awaited her. King Oba rose slowly from his throne, his eyes sweeping over the court before settling on Amahle. The room, filled with nobles and visitors, seemed to hold its breath. "Amahle," he said, his voice strong and steady, "you have walked a long and difficult path, yet you have done so with courage, kindness, and honor. Today I call you my daughter." The words echoed through the hall, and Amahle felt a warmth rise in her chest. After all the shame, the betrayal, the nights spent shivering and alone, she was finally seen, not for what she had lost, but for who she was. The court murmured, some in awe, others in disbelief. King Oba did not stop there. He turned his gaze toward her family, who had been present for the audience. Tendai, her brother, stiffened, his face pale with a mixture of fear and anger. "You, who twisted truth and sought gain through deceit, have shown your true nature," the king said. "Your greed and hypocrisy will no longer harm the innocent. Let all witness that virtue is stronger than manipulation, and honesty stronger than lie." The nobles exchanged glances, their whispers carrying shock and approval. Amahle's family could no longer hide behind respectability. Their faults were laid bare for everyone to see. Amahle remained calm, holding herself with quiet dignity. She did not gloat, she did not point fingers. Instead, she let the king's words speak for her. The shame that had clung to her in the village seemed to fall away, replaced by a sense of justice that felt right and balanced. The whispers of admiration began to ripple through the crowd. People who had once looked down on her now regarded her with respect. Her journey, her trials, her integrity, all of it had led to this moment of recognition. Tendai's attempts to justify his actions faltered under the king's scrutiny. His lies, once convincing to their parents, now sounded hollow and weak. Other family members looked on, some with guilt, others with envy, realizing that the child they had scorned had grown into someone remarkable. Amahle's eyes met her mother's briefly. There was hesitation, shame, and a hint of regret, but Amahle did not seek apology. Her strength did not need their approval. It had already been acknowledged by the one who mattered most in that room. By the end of the audience, the court was transformed. Where there had been judgment, mockery, and dismissal, there was now respect and awe. Amahle, once humiliated and cast aside, stood tall, recognized for her courage, virtue, and resilience. King Oba's declaration had not only honored her, but it had also set an example, that integrity and kindness, even in the face of suffering, were worth more than power or deception. For Amahle, this was not just a triumph. It was the moment where her journey and her character were finally acknowledged, and those who had mocked her were forced to reckon with the truth of her strength. Amahle returned to her village a different person. Word of King Oba's judgment had traveled fast, and the reactions from her family were as mixed as they were intense. Some relatives approached her with hesitant smiles, trying to apologize or act as if nothing had happened, while others avoided her gaze completely, retreating into silence, their pride wounded. Tendai, her brother, looked particularly bitter, his jealousy clear in every forced smile and stiff movement. He could not understand how the girl he had tried to humiliate had gained recognition, honor, and respect while he, the manipulator, now stood exposed. Her parents were torn. They had once believed Tendai's lies and turned their backs on Amahle, but now faced with the king's judgment, they wrestled with shame and regret. They attempted cautious conversations, seeking forgiveness, but Amahle handled them with quiet dignity. She listened without anger, acknowledged their feelings without lowering herself, and set boundaries firmly. She had learned through her journey that forgiveness did not mean forgetting or excusing wrongs. It meant choosing to rise above bitterness and reclaim her own peace. Other family members who had stayed silent now whispered among themselves, unsure of how to respond. Some were inspired by Amahle's strength and began to rethink their own behavior, while others resented the attention she was receiving. Yet Amahle did not allow their jealousy or attempts at manipulation to sway her. She understood that her worth was not determined by their approval, but by her own actions, her courage, and her integrity. The story of her return and the king's judgment quickly spread throughout the village. People who had witnessed or experienced injustice felt a spark of hope. Women and girls who had been silenced or ignored saw in Amahle an example of resilience and self-respect. Villagers came to her, not just to congratulate her, but to seek guidance, to hear how she had endured betrayal and hardship without losing herself. Her experiences became lessons in courage and dignity, stories shared in homes and marketplaces, whispered to children at bedtime, and remembered during village gatherings. Through it all, Amahle maintained her grace. She did not flaunt her triumph, nor did she use it to humiliate those who had wronged her. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that drew respect naturally. In facing her family's disbelief, anger, and jealousy without anger or compromise, she demonstrated the kind of strength that could not be shaken by fear or resentment. Amahle had become more than the girl who had been expelled. She had become a symbol of integrity, resilience, and hope. Her story reminded the village that injustice could be overcome, that courage and kindness mattered, and that true strength often emerged from the darkest moment. With the king's support, Amahle began building a new life in Ndola, one that was filled with purpose and hope. She knew what it felt like to be abandoned, misunderstood, and pushed aside, and she was determined that no girl should endure what she had faced alone. Using the king's guidance and the resources he offered, she started a charitable foundation for abandoned and vulnerable girls. The center provided food, shelter, and education, but it also offered something harder to give: belief in themselves and the courage to dream beyond their circumstance. Amahle spent her days organizing classes, meeting with the girls, and planning programs to teach skills that would help them build independent lives. She listened to their stories with patience, remembering her own journey, and encouraged them to hold on to hope even in the darkest time. Her presence was steady and reassuring, a reminder that someone had faced struggle and emerged stronger. She did not speak of revenge or bitterness. Instead, she spoke of resilience, integrity, and the power of helping others. In every small success of the girls, learning to read, gaining confidence, or finding their first work opportunities, Amahle found joy far deeper than anything she had ever imagined for herself. The village of Ndola soon came to respect her not only for her past courage, but for the life she was creating now. People spoke of the girl who had once been cast out and humiliated, now guiding others with wisdom and compassion. Amahle's story inspired others to act, to care for those in need, and to recognize that true strength was not measured by wealth, titles, or power, but by the courage to rise and lift others as you climb. Even with her growing responsibilities, Amahle remained humble. She met challenges with the same calm determination she had learned on the road. scarce resources, bureaucratic obstacles, and skepticism from some members of the community. But she faced each difficulty with patience and ingenuity, finding creative solutions without losing her principle. The foundation became a place of safety, learning, and hope, growing steadily under her guidance. As months and years passed, Amahle saw her efforts transform lives. Girls who had been abandoned or overlooked discovered their voices, skills, and confidence. The community began to change, inspired by her example of selfless courage and commitment to justice. Amahle realized that her past suffering had not been wasted. It had shaped her, giving her the empathy and determination to create something meaningful. Her legacy was no longer just her personal triumph, but the ongoing impact she had on others. Amahle's courage, honesty, and resilience became a legend in the region. People told her story in homes and markets, not as a tale of misfortune, but as proof that life could be transformed through service, integrity, and unwavering self-respect. She had turned her pain into purpose, and in doing so, had created a life that mattered far beyond herself. Every smile of a girl she helped, every success she witnessed, reminded Amahle that the most powerful victory was not revenge or recognition, but the ability to use your own strength to lift others and make the world a little brighter. Amahle sat in the quiet of her office at the foundation, looking out over the courtyard where the girls she had helped played and learned. She thought back to the night she had slept on that dusty porch, shivering under a thin blanket, humiliated and alone. The memory of her brother's betrayal, the whispers of neighbors, and the fear that had gnawed at her heart seemed almost unreal now. Yet every hardship, every step of her journey, had led her to this moment. She had been thrown out, tested, and challenged, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Being embraced by King Oba as his daughter had been more than honor. It had been a recognition of her courage, her integrity, and her resilience. It showed her that true strength was not measured by wealth, family approval, or status, but by the way one faced adversity and remained true to oneself. Amahle realized that every act of kindness, every moment she had chosen courage over fear, had shaped the life she now led. Her triumph was not only in her own story, but in the lives she had touched along the way. Looking at the girls under her care, Amahle understood that her legacy was not about fame or revenge. It was about showing the power of character, patience, and unwavering self-respect. She had turned her suffering into a force for good, proving that even the darkest beginnings could lead to light. People in Ndola and beyond spoke of her journey, and her story inspired many to act with integrity and compassion, even when the world seemed unfair. Amahle smiled softly, knowing that her path had been difficult but meaningful. She had learned that resilience and virtue mattered more than anything else, and that justice could be achieved without bitterness. Her life was now a testament to courage, empathy, and the quiet power of standing firm in one's truth, a legacy that would endure long after her own story was told.